Let's have our great drag queen debate. This follows an incident the other day in Reading where some angry parents stormed a local library because there was an event going on called Story Hour, and that was a drag queen giving it called Sab Samuel, who works under the name Aida H Dee, was teaching some kids, or was telling kids stories in a library, and some parents stormed it and said this is wrong. He's using the word probably, teaching them there are 100 genders, sexualizing young kids. 3 to 11-year-olds were involved. Don't forget that, of course, drag queens more and more are being taken into schools to do lessons to kids, and I guess the question is why. So let's get both sides of the story. A warm welcome to social commentator Emma Webb and to co-founder of the grassroots activism team, Trans Activism UK, Felix Fern. Welcome, both of you.
Hi. Hi, Kevin.
Let's go to you first, Felix, if I may. Why are drag queens going into schools to tell kids stories? What is the point of this? Can't we just leave the education of children, often primary school children, to teachers who could maybe teach them things like maths and English and history and geography, that sort of thing? Why the move to have drag queens going into schools, and in this case libraries, you know, a tour of libraries and community centres to tell stories to kids? What's it all about?
Why not? It's not replacing education in schools. It's just a story time thing, already exists. You get like people dressing as princesses. No one complains about that. You get Princess Story Hour. This just happens to be drag queens. They're not engaging in any kind of adult themed education. It's literally just someone in a fabulous outfit reading stories to kids with the consent and presence of their parents. No harm done.
Emma, the group that backs Sab Samuel, or Aida H Dee, say that the point of his storytelling sessions in libraries around the country, is on a national tour, is to teach inclusivity and encourage children, and I quote, to get fabulous. What's wrong with that?
Drag queens that are involved in this. I think the concern that parents have is that this is exposing children to something that is age inappropriate. And so if you look at their names, there's one drag queen called Miss Beaver, another called Flow Job. One London library had to apologise because it had what it was termed in the papers as a rainbow dildo butt monkey. These things are not appropriate for children. Drag queens are associated with adult entertainment. It's a conflation to say that this is the same thing as a panto dame taking part in a sort of tongue-in-cheek children's family-friendly panto. One of these drag queens was involved in some event at the British Library, and I want to read you the description of how this event was promoted, and I put this to Felix. I want to know whether you think this is appropriate for a children's event. This is a quote from the promotion. It said, having worked, this is talking about one of these drag queens, having worked across all areas of drag queen story time, she's one of our most experienced queens. She's from children's nursery rhymes to stories and games. She'll have you on the edge of your seat and gagging for more. Is this appropriate? Is it appropriate to have a drag queen performer that also does adult entertainment working with children? There have been drag queens who have come out against this, one called Kitty Demure, who asked whether you would have a stripper or a porn star influencing your child. The concern is that this is adult entertainment that is going into children's spaces, and I think parents are fairly concerned about the safeguarding of children.
Is that a good point, Felix? What would you say to that?
Yes, there's a few things in there to address. One of them was the rainbow dildo butt monkeys. That was actually a weird art performance thing that was done in public, and a bunch of people took photos and said, oh, look at these people going and interacting and corrupting with kids. It had nothing to do with kids and nothing to do with queer people either, so it's totally irrelevant to this conversation. When it comes to drag queens' names, we have grown up with innuendos in British comedy forever. There have always been in-jokes in TV and mainstream media. I grew up with Kenny Everett, who performed as the drag performer Cupid Stunt. that did not have any impact on me as a kid. I just found it amusing as a child. As you get older, you realise these things. But kids, it goes totally over their head and has nothing to do with who is reading them a story, no matter what their name is. When it comes to that description, I don't personally find it offensive. I think it's meant to be a nod to the parents and the consenting adults who will be reading it. It also has nothing to do with who is doing the story time. I'd like to clarify that these story time events were created by a cis woman, not even by like drag queens themselves. And it was a mother who thought that this would be a good idea, and other parents think it's a good idea. And I think it should be up to those adults to decide what is appropriate for their children, who are there watching what's happening. And if they don't like it, they can complain or leave, and as they should if it is inappropriate. But there have been no evidence that people sitting and reading to children is in any way offensive.
The demonstrators who came to Reading to protest about Aida H Dee the other day, they said, and I think it's possibly slightly unfair, they said, I'm going to quote, that SAB was probably teaching their children that there are 100 genders or more. Now, if he was, that would be wrong, wouldn't it?
Well, they're not teaching any kind of education, so it's irrelevant. It's just an adult reading a story to children with their parents' presence. What's far more frightening to me is the people who are protesting. If you see like the video of what was happening in Reading, there are a lot of grown adults screaming at people with children, with babies, trying to walk into a building, yelling paedophile at children. That to me is far more problematic than anything that was happening in that library.
Emma, why is it that drag queens are suddenly cropping up at more and more schools? I've got nothing against drag queens. I've certainly got nothing against drag queens in terms of adult entertainment. Yeah. And I suppose if they tone down their content and they make sure it's child appropriate, you know, I can understand why some people would say, well, why not? But I just don't quite understand why it is that drag queens are going into schools. What's the necessity for this?
Yeah, I agree. I think that drag is fine as a form of adult entertainment, and what people are concerned about. And, you know, we're a very tolerant nation. We like bawdy tongue-in-cheek. We like things like burlesque. That's fine for adult entertainment. But I think the concern here for parents is that this is something that is inappropriate around children. And so you have to ask, you know, what is this for? You know, is this for the children or is this for the adults? What is the purpose of, and some drag queens themselves have asked this, why is it that these parents want drag queens to be reading stories to their children? And one of the reasons that this was originally for, when it was started in the United States in 2015, was that it was supposed to firstly introduce children to queer role models, and secondly to introduce them to the concepts of gender fluidity, and which is the definition of inclusivity according to these activists. But what this really is a radical ideology that many parents are actually opposed to. And the concern as well, I think, is we have to recognise this is coming in a broader context. This is coming in a broader context to do with trans ideology and children, and to do with children, increasing numbers of children transitioning to being another gender. And there are safeguarding concerns there as well, because this the gender ideology that is being taught leads them to question their senses. It leads children to for example, if you're compelled to use a pronoun that doesn't align with what you see with your eyes, you're basically asking children to get used to a kind of radical subjectivism. And there are safeguarding concerns around that. So this is coming within a broader context where people are worried about who is able to get into women's spaces, who is able to get into children's spaces. And I think if trans activists want to have a genuine, fair-minded conversation with their opponents, they need to recognise that there are genuine and sincere concerns about safeguarding involved here, and that these people are not, you know, fascists and bigots, that they're not homophobes. These are people who are concerned about children's well-being.
Felix, I've had a question from one of our viewers, James in London. He says, what next? Strippers telling stories to children? You know, what would you say to that?
Well, there's a few things. So to address what Emma was saying, I think, honestly, it's just conspiratorial nonsense that is coming from homophobia. It absolutely is homophobia. We've grown up with panto queens and drag queens in mainstream media. How many people have watched Mrs. Brown's Boys, I bet, and haven't had an issue with that? It's the idea that these people are gay, therefore they are different, therefore they shouldn't be interacting with children.
Are drag queens necessarily gay?
No, but a lot of them
exactly.
are.
So why is it homophobia then?
Because they stem from queer culture, and the vast majority of people will see them and associate them with being gay, whether they are or not. They will see it and see it as different and therefore want to demonize it. The idea that it could be adult sex workers doing things with children, as far as I'm concerned, what someone's job is at any point in time does not negate anything else in their life. There are sex workers who are parents. That does not mean that they shouldn't be around children, and the idea that they shouldn't be around children is just baffling, old-fashioned nonsense.
Point taken, Felix. Emma, I mean, but once again, what would be the point of strippers talking to children or sex workers talking to children, even if they don't bring their work into their storytelling? And so that extends to what is the point of drag queens telling stories to children?
Yeah, I think that's the question that parents are asking, and the parents are, and I think it's absolutely wrong to say that this is some way stemming from homophobia. The concern is that drag act, and anyone who's seen a drag act knows that that is a performance that is associated with adult nighttime entertainment. I'm not saying it's the same as being a porn star or being a stripper, but it's associated with a highly sexualized act. One of the drag queens that I mentioned earlier that was in this British Library event, also, as well as doing Drag Queen Story Hour, had an adult evening entertainment show called Disgraceful Behaviour. And so when you're talking about queer role models for children, firstly, there are parents who would ask, is this the sort of person that you want to be a role model for your children? Why are these people going into children's spaces? Because there are many people who do drag, and there are many people who you would say are broadly within the queer community who wouldn't do that and don't think that that's appropriate, and also people who would rightly question whether or not drag queens are a good role model for people within the queer community, because they're so heavily associated with sexualized entertainment.
Felix, last question to you. Why do drag queens want to do this? Why do they want to go into schools and libraries and tell stories to kids? Why don't they just concentrate on their lucrative careers in the adult entertainment world?
Why do I do volunteer work? Because it's a nice thing to do. It's not some kind of scary propaganda or some underlying reason to want to go and read stories to kids. If someone says to you, like, your outfits are really interesting and kids might enjoy that, do you want to come and do this thing? Why is that a scary or a bad thing? I think the suggestion that they're doing it for some underlying reason is terrifying homophobia.
Thank you to both of you for stressing your arguments in an entertaining and interesting way. Thank you very much. That was Emma Webb, social commentator, and Felix Fern, co-founder of the grassroots activism team Trans Activism UK.